if they are honest with themselves that these laws don't have an effect on criminals, they only hurt the law-abiding. We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are talking about a deceptive article from the New York Times that tries to paint Texas's constitutional or permitless carry law as the answer to all of the world's woes. We're going to be going through the examples that they provide in the article and explain why that they really aren't relevant to their argument. Clearly, this is a partisan article calling for gun control, but I think we're going to illustrate perfectly why these examples don't really apply, don't lend credence to their argument, and it's something that you need to understand as a gun owner so that when you see these arguments made in public, you know how to respond to them. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. Now, the article starts off with a very tragic story involving a man named Tony Earls. Tony and his wife were attempting to make a deposit at a bank here in Houston, and they were robbed at gunpoint. In response to the attempted robbery, Mr. Earls pulled his self-defense firearm. He shot at the attacking robber. Unfortunately, Mr. Earls did not strike his intended target and killed an innocent bystander, a 9-year-old girl by the name of Arlene Alvarez. Now, this is a tragic, tragic example. Unfortunately, and for the New York Times, I don't think that they understand Texas's constitutional carry law because this example doesn't apply whatsoever. Now, under Texas law, folks have been allowed to carry handguns in their vehicles for quite some time without a license or permit to carry. So whether this was related to Texas's constitutional or permitless carry law is completely irrelevant. When the New York Times tries to create some kind of connection between this tragedy in their article entitled "Texas Goes Permitless on Guns and Police Face an Armed Public," that connection just really isn't there. Now, the next example that they move on to, they are quoted as saying in Eagle Pass, Texas, drunken arguments have flared into shootings. This example is not a good example of Texas's permitless or constitutional carry law going haywire. Well, for one, Texas law already criminalized, being out in public while intoxicated. So that's a crime. The second crime here is, and this is actually passed into the law by HB 1927, Texas's constitutional carry, they criminalize carrying handguns while in public, while intoxicated generally. So this is an example where, the New York Times is trying to say, hey, look, now we got drunk people carrying guns out in public. That itself is a crime under the law. So not really applicable in this situation. Now, the next example that they bring up is they say that there isn't really any statewide data to discuss whether violent crime or firearm homicides have increased since the law went into effect. Now, they have some experts here, some folks from Stanford. They have John Lott as quoted. They both have their kind of own conclusions of what's going on and tried to attribute it to Texas's constitutional carry. But what we see is that violent crime across the United States is on the rise. Now, this, really took off in 2020 and it continued into 2021. But what we see is violent crime across the United States going up by 15 to 35%, depending on what region of the country you're in. So I don't know that we can blame, muggings in Los Angeles and, people getting robbed on the subways in New York City. I don't know that we can blame all of that on Texas's constitutional carry law. So when you see these things trying to be connected with one or another, they go on and they concede in this article that we don't have the data yet. Now, predictably, they go on to talk about the tragedy in Uvalde. School shooting, one of the worst in Texas history, and an absolute tragedy. Uvalde isn't relevant to Texas's constitutional carry laws because the attacker in that case used rifles. Texas's constitutional carry law relates just to handguns carried by people 21 years of age or older in public, and they can't be prohibited or disqualified from carrying under state or federal law. So when they point to the Uvalde example, we know it is a tragedy, it pulls on our heartstrings, but it doesn't lend credence to their argument that this has something to do with Texas constitutional carry. Now, we do see some good news, and this is kind of hidden at the end of the article. They say in Dallas, there's been a rise in the number of homicides deemed justifiable, such as those conducted in self-defense, even as overall shootings have declined from last year's highs. They quote the Dallas police chief. He says, "We've had justifiable shootings where potential victims have defended themselves." So he said it cuts both ways, and we completely agree. We talk to folks every single day who save their lives, their loved ones, because they act in self-defense. They talk about a Port Arthur incident where a man with a handgun who had a license saw two armed robbers at a Church's Chicken and fired through the drive-through window. Now, in this example they provide, and why, this is good. Obviously, this shows that folks are coming to the aid of other people. In this case, they're talking about license holders. So maybe will give 1 point to the New York Times. They talked to Michael Matta, the president of the local police union in Dallas, and he said that his fellow officers have seen no increase in violent crime tied to the new permitless carry law, even though that there are absolutely more guns on the street. So we have Dallas, one of the biggest cities in the state of Texas, and their president of their local union saying, we really haven't seen this increase that everyone saw. When Texas's constitutional carry was being argued in the House, we saw clips of politicians saying that there was going to be blood running in the streets, that this was going to be the Wild Wild West. The law's been in effect for about a year now, and we just really haven't seen that happen. They go on to talk to Sheriff David Soward of Atascosa County. This is a rural area south of San Antonio, and he said that they haven't seen any apparent increase in shootings, quoting saying, only a small percentage of people actually take advantage of the law. So we have Dallas, major city here in the state of Texas, no increase in violent crime. We have Atascosa County, more rural, smaller county, no increase in violent crime. So across the board here, we're seeing some trends that, hey, maybe this just hasn't moved the needle that much. Now, the last example that they go to is they speak to Kim Ogg, who is the district attorney for Harris County. That's where Houston is located. It's the most populous county here in the state of Texas. And she says that we've seen more carrying weapons, which by itself would be legal. But people are carrying the weapons while committing other crimes. And I'm not talking about violent crimes. I'm talking about intoxication crimes or driving crimes or property crimes, carrying weapons on school property or in another prohibited place, including bars and school grounds. So you see, even Kim Ogg here concedes. We're not seeing more violent crimes. We're seeing an uptick in kind of these statutorily prohibited crimes. Or she said carrying a vehicle. So driving while intoxicated with a handgun, while carrying a handgun, that's a crime. So they're seeing an uptick in that. So more people carrying. And then we see people carrying in those statutorily prohibited places. So a person who's not hurting themselves, not hurting another person, but carrying in one of those places that the state of Texas has said, no, you can't carry a gun here, like a bar. Now, she says school grounds. I think that's a little interesting because school grounds, that is not a prohibited location under Texas law. So she's the chief law enforcement officer for Harris County. You think she would know what places are off limits to firearms. Carrying inside of a school, yes, definitely off limits, but she kind of misquotes here. I don't know if she's trying to be deceptive here or doesn't know the law. It's one of the two, but we see that that's not really an example of a violation of Texas's constitutional carry. The New York Times, we see their agenda laid out pretty clearly here. They are mad that the gun grabbers are losing ground. We see this in the wake of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin case. And we see a lot of states, clamoring to put as many gun laws on the books as they can in response to that case. Now, they're going to be sorely disappointed when, one, the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment doesn't support the new laws that they're putting into effect. But when we look at the reality behind, maybe these laws, we start to see that if they are honest with themselves, that these laws don't have an effect on criminals. They only hurt the law-abiding. And when we have the law-abiding, empowered with the ability to defend themselves and their families, that we actually see them coming to their defense where maybe law enforcement can't get there in time. But I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And we always appreciate your questions in the comment section down below. What do you think about this article? Do you think the New York Times know what they're doing? Leave us a comment, and until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.